Shalom, dear friends. How you doing? How have you been? This recording is in lieu of the fact that on Wednesday, the 13th of August, I forgot to press the record button. So I'm attempting now to give a little bit of an overview, maybe a little bit of a summary of what we studied together on Wednesday, August 13th. It's not going to be the full hour. I don't know how long it's going to be. I just wanted to give you some of the more important salient points that we covered in our study of Pirke Avot at the beginning of the first chapter of the Ethics of the Fathers. Excuse me. One of the things that we have studied is the fact that Moses received the Torah, the written and oral law, from Sinai, the mountain of Sinai. And we spoke about why was it called Sinai as opposed to saying Moses received the Torah from God. That's a more direct statement. Why mention the mountain? And I mentioned that the reason that the mountain is mentioned is because we have a tradition that before giving the Torah at Mount Sinai, the traditional story is that God asked other nations if they would like the Torah, and they said, "What is it? What does it contain?" "Oh, it contains thou shalt not kill. Thou shalt not kill. This is the way we live our lives." He went to other nations, etc. But there's a parallel teaching that God announced that he's going to give the Torah on a mountain, and the higher, taller mountains all said arrogantly, not that a mountain can talk, but this is the teaching, that the taller, larger mountains said, "Ooh, ooh, ooh, God will declare the Torah while his presence rests on me." And they were arguing with each other. "No, it'll be me because I'm taller or more beautiful, etc., etc." And the mountain of Sinai, according to this teaching, said nothing. It was the smallest, tiniest mountain in the mountain range of Sinai, and it said nothing. And so the story goes, the punchline, God chose to rest his holy presence and call Moses to the top of the mountain of Sinai. Why? Because it was the most humble of mountains. And I mentioned that humility is not only a good trait and a character to have in general, but when we study the Torah or we study any of our faith texts, whatever faith it is, every faith has faith texts, that when we study it, we have to study it with humility. We have to study it in a way that lets the teachings in. Because when we're humble, we can absorb it. We let it in because we don't know everything. If you're arrogant, you can't really absorb the teachings of your faith text because your arrogance does not let it in. You know everything, so there's nothing to let in. I gave the example of one of my congregants many years ago in the United States who always asked me every Jewish question beginning with the words, "Rabbi, isn't it true that?" And that was a clue to me when he said, "Isn't it true that he was more important to him to be right than to know what the law is." You can understand that by the word he chose. Isn't it true that somebody that's coming to a rabbi or any clergy person with a sense of humility would say, "Rabbi, I was wondering, what is the law if this and this happens? What is the procedure if this and this needs to be done?" As opposed to, "Isn't it true that?" So we spoke a little bit about that the mountain of Sinai was the most humble, and we best learn our faith texts and our tradition when we are humble, when we are open, when we can let it in, as opposed to being arrogant and feel that we know everything and we don't let in anything because, like I said, we already know it. Okay, so it says in teaching number 1, which I sent you a link. Actually, my wife Rivka sent a link to the text that we're using from Chabad.org. It's somewhere on our WhatsApp group. And the link said that it was passed down from Moses to Joshua to the elders to the prophets, and they gave it over the tradition, large T, tradition, they gave it over to the men of the Great Assembly. They were a group of 120 leaders, rabbis and other kinds of leaders, who were a legislative body from around the year 520 before the Common Era, which means it was about the beginning of the Second Temple period, because the first one was destroyed in 586 before the Common Era. So about 80 years later, men of the Great Assembly are now forming a legislative body to continue the tradition, even though the temple has been destroyed after 400 years. So what do we do with Judaism now? How do we proceed? How do we change things? How do we massage things? We don't have the temple. That's a biggie. Anyway, a legislative body from, again, around the years 520 BCE before the Common Era, all the way to about the destruction of the Second Temple after 400 plus years. That occurred in the year 70. So these are the men of the Great Assembly. And in teaching number 1, it says they would always say these 3 things. I mentioned they didn't always say these. They said a lot of stuff. Over 550-year period, they said a lot of stuff. They promulgated a lot of things. But they were known for these 3 invaluable teachings. What are they? Be cautious in judgment, establish many pupils, and make a safety fence around the Torah. So we spent some time last Wednesday trying to understand what that means, and here's some thoughts about that. Yeah, be cautious in judgment. So there happened to be 3 judges that I can think of on TV or YouTube or wherever you look for that kind of stuff. There is a Judge Judy. And Judge Judy can be very cantankerous. She has a huge following, huge audience, huge paycheck. Because she's very popular. I think millions and millions and millions of people watch her. But she's got an edge. If you've ever seen her, you know she can bark, she can scream, she can shout. She can be halfway down your throat before you have a chance to say anything. But the teaching is be patient in judgment. She has a lot of things going for her, but I would not call her patient. There's another judge named Judge Minion. Nice lady. Also a judge, kind of blondish hair, much younger than Judge Judy. Has a nicer way about her. She can be a little cranky every once in a while, but she wants to know more about the person, the circumstance, etc. And she's willing to give the case a lot of time if she needs to. Judge Judy kind of comes in and tries to cut to the chase right away. Judge Minion is a lot more patient. And that's the teaching. Be patient in judgment. Don't rush to judge. Don't be impatient. Be careful with your tone and demeanor is the lesson. There's a 3rd judge named Judge Frank Caprio. He's not well now, but for many, many years, he did a show called Caught in Providence, Rhode Island. It catches my attention because I was raised in Providence, Rhode Island, born here in Israel. But when we left as a family to the United States, we spent 2 years in Pittsfield, Massachusetts. The first syllable of Pittsfield will tell you everything you want to know about it. And then the rest of the time was in Providence, Rhode Island. It's where I grew up. Most members of my family in America live in Providence, Rhode Island. Anyway, Judge Frank Caprio is a judge, and he does mostly traffic violations, etc. And he, in my opinion, couldn't be nicer. He gives everybody the benefit of the doubt. What happened here? Let's see the video of your slowing down. When it says slow down, it doesn't look like you slowed down at all. What were the circumstances? Do you have enough money to pay? If you don't have enough money to pay to remove the boot or to pay the fine, I have a certain fund named in memory of my mother that people always send money to, and if you need the $50 because you can't afford the ticket, we'll pay it for you. Judge Frank Caprio, caught in Providence, he is almost the diametric opposite of Judge Judy, and Judge Minion is somewhere in the middle. So that's what it means. They taught 3 lessons. The first one is be patient in judgment. Now, what if you're not a judge? How does this lesson apply to you? Well, it could apply to you if you are, for example, a teacher. Be patient. A coach. Be patient. A parent. Be patient. We have to judge even one child or several. He did, she did. How do you judge? You have to be very, very patient and hope that God is with you in trying to discern who's right, who's wrong, who's got the truth behind them, who's fudging it, etc. So that's one lesson they taught: be patient in judgment. They taught a second lesson called, excuse me, establish many students. So what does that mean? Yeah. First of all, one thing it means is to learn is very important in Judaism, as it is in many faith traditions. To learn, to study, to understand the faith text of your tradition. Very, very important. But I would say in Judaism, that's kind of like the penultimate most important thing. The most important thing, higher than learning, is teaching. Teaching what you know. So learning is big. A lot of stuff I could teach you 10 hours if I was prepared, all about what Judaism says about learning, study, discovery, texts, a lot. Higher than that is teaching. So if you're going to study, that's very good. If you're going to study in order to teach, that is the brass ring. So what does it mean, establish many students? Yeah, whatever you know, teach as many as you can. He's clearly talking about rabbis and teachers. It's a Jewish text, remember? We're pulling out lessons that can be applied to any faith tradition. But he's talking specifically about rabbis. Establish many students. Make sure that the communities around the world that are Jewish communities have leaders. So establish many students. I went to Yeshiva University in the Bronx, Upper Manhattan, 6,000 students. Many students every year studying to become rabbis. Yeah, establish many students. But as I mentioned, I think in the first lesson, sometimes the English doesn't always match in nuance what the Hebrew wants to say. The Hebrew word for establish is ha'emidu. Laha'amid comes from the Hebrew word la'amod, which means to stand. And the idea of establish many students is not just to teach as many as you can so they can become the teachers of the students or they can become the leaders. It also means establish students so they can stand on their own. Teach them well enough that they don't need to come back to you every 5 minutes and say, what do I do in this situation? What do I do in this case? Establish many students means help them to be stable and steady and stand on their own without having to ask every few minutes or every few days or every few weeks. Listen, if you got a question of your mentor, ask. No question about it. But the teaching says, establish many students, make them complete as much as you can so that they know as much as they can, so that they can stand on their own as much as they can. Okay, their third lesson was make a protective fence around the Torah. What in the world could that mean? A protective fence. So here I think last Wednesday had an interesting discussion about that. It means on a simple level to protect the faith, draw a fence around the faith so that what is important to the faith is not lost, and what is not important to the faith, or what might be a new fad, or something very, very new, or something that was unacceptable, but it's acceptable in the last 10 years, make a fence around the Torah, around your faith text or your faith, so that whatever is out there may not always be what you want to bring in through the fence and make it part of your own understanding, your own faith tradition. Make a protective fence around the Torah. Decide what in society is good for your faith, and decide what in society is not particularly good for your faith. What doesn't match the important values of your tradition. And if it doesn't match, maybe you need to create a fence around your tradition to avoid letting that in. So I'm not going to get specific, okay? Think what you want, imagine what you want, but this is their idea. This is the teaching of the men of the Great Assembly. And interestingly enough, in Judaism, Jewish practice, there are a couple of what I would call pretty good examples of putting a fence around the Torah. So every Friday afternoon in Judaism comes Shabbat. Late in the afternoon, right before it gets dark. Technically, the candles for Shabbat should be lit right before Shabbat begins. But the rabbis had a worry, what if you're late by a minute or two and boom, it's Shabbat already? The traditional Jew just does not light lights on Shabbat, not matches, not turning on light switches. So the rabbis decided, in order to make a fence around the Torah, nowadays when you look at a Jewish calendar and it tells you on the Friday square what time to light candles, it says that you light candles 18 minutes before sunset. Technically, you could light it right a minute before sunset. But again, there's the concern. What if you didn't get to it? You're distracted, whatever. A minute goes by and you're no longer able to light the Shabbat candles, which spiritually for the Jewish people and others who do it is a very, very important symbol. The light of Shabbat is a very, very important symbol. So make a fence around the Torah. Don't light it a minute before sunset, 18 minutes before sunset. That way you have time. You have time to get distracted, do the last minute kind of things. Did everybody take a shower? Did we do this? Did we prepare that? Is everything ready for Shabbat? 18 minutes before sunset is exactly a fence, a protective fence around the Torah. So we have another example. You may know that traditional Jewish people will wait between eating meat and milk. Any meaty product, there is a waiting time before eating a dairy product. Some Jewish people wait 6 hours. Some people wait 5 hours. Some people wait into the 6th hour. Some people, like myself, coming from a Hungarian tradition, their tradition was to wait 3 hours. The Dutch wait 1 hour between a meaty eating and a dairy eating. 1 hour, 3 hours, 5 hours, into the 6th hour. Exactly 6 hours. Could one of those be more correct than the other? Probably. Maybe 1 hour could be enough, depending what you understand is the purpose of separating between meat and milk. Because it says in the Torah 3 different times, don't seethe a kid in its mother's milk. Our rabbis understood that as don't eat them together, don't cook them together, don't have any benefit from them together. So you would never, I would be shocked if you did, you would never see a kippah wearing Jewish man, for example, working at a McDonald's making cheeseburgers. Because one of the prohibitions is you're not allowed to benefit from both of those together. So how can you be making them or selling them? You're benefiting from the cheese and the meat being together. Anyway, so separating by hours, few hours, 1 hour, separating is another example of making a fence around the Torah. Do something to protect the law so that it doesn't become easily violated or trampled on. Okay, they had very good teachings. They had 3 teachings. We'll find that in Pirke Avot, if we continue, God willing, we'll find that there are many teachings that come in 3s. Some psychologists say 3s are the easiest to remember. I don't know how many of you remember Perry Mason. Okay, he was a lawyer years ago. I remember as a kid watching Perry Mason. And anytime one of the attorneys would want to object to something, they would always say, I object. That was, whatever was just said, was irrelevant, incompetent, and immaterial. Now, why in the world, all these decades later, do I remember that? That's irrelevant, incompetent, and immaterial. I think one of the reasons I remember it is it's 3. It's quick, memorable. There could be other things that go along with that, but in any case, there are many threes. So here comes in teaching number 2. It says, Shimon the righteous. This is number 2. Shimon the righteous was among the last surviving members of the Great Assembly. He was one of the last of the 120 serving towards the year 70, when the Second Temple was destroyed in Jerusalem. He would say, he also had 3 teachings. He would say, the world stands on 3 things: the Torah, the service of God, and deeds of kindness. Nice. Shimon the righteous. I mentioned Wednesday night that there is a street in Jerusalem called Shimon the Righteous Street. Interesting. I don't know how interesting, but I find it interesting. Anyway, so we want to know a little bit more about this for maybe about 10 minutes. Shimon the Righteous, again, he was one of the last of the members of the Mennonite Great Assembly that served over 500 years between the beginning of the Second Temple and the destruction of that Second Temple. Note that he doesn't say the Jewish world stands on 3 things. He is not particular here. He's very universal. The world, not the Jewish world, the world stands on 3 things. I think he's teaching all of us, no matter what faith tradition you are when you read that line. I think he's teaching all of us that the world in general thrives, survives on the idea of Torah, meaning a person having a faith, a God, a divine spirit in their lives. And he says that the world thrives on the service of God, that God that you believe in, you also believe that he requests things of you. He has a job for you. He has a mission for you. And so we pray to God. Service of God is like prayer or study. It's a universal application. And the last thing that he mentions is deeds of kindness. Where would the world be? Forget the Jewish world. Where would the world be without people feeling something in their heart for others that are disadvantaged, homeless, helpless, hopeless, whatever? So that's his 3 pillars. One of the things I pointed out on Wednesday is, again, a nuance in Hebrew that you don't get in the English. So the Hebrew says, for the words he used to say, the Hebrew is hu haya omer. And we'll find that often in Pirke, Avot, Ethics of the Fathers. He used to say. Literally, the translation of these 3 words in Hebrew, hu haya omer, we can say hu haya. He was the embodiment of a value, and then omer, then he would teach it. In other words, if he is teaching that the world stands on study of the Torah or study of your faith texts, the Hebrew seems to indicate that he became virtuous in that idea. He practiced studying the text of the Jewish people, and only when he saw the importance of that study, then he could teach it as an important value. You can bet that Shimon the righteous, when he talked about how important the service of God is, study, prayer, etc., we know that hu haya, first he did all that. He practiced prayer, he practiced study. And when he became the embodiment of that value, then omer, only then would he teach it. Because he would say to himself, how can I teach it if I don't really live it seriously and to the fullest of my ability? I can't teach it as a fraud. I have to live it. And if it's livable, I can teach it. Or the 3rd lesson that he had, deeds of kindness. You have to imagine that Shimon the righteous, because of the Hebrew phrase, hu haya omer, Shimon the righteous practiced doing good deeds, and not always the easy good deeds. They're the easy ones. They're the very hard ones. So he practiced good deeds, easy, hard, good deeds, whatever they were. And only when he saw the value of it and when he became the embodiment of somebody who is steeped in good deeds, then Omer, only then could he possibly teach that lesson and that value. So, the next thing that we went over this particular teaching of Shimon the righteous is not just the fact that he says the world stands on three things, and he doesn't say the Jewish world. He universalizes this idea. Another thing that I posed to the people that were there Wednesday night on Zoom, I said, let me ask you something. If somebody told you that the world stands on three pillars, what three pillars would you choose? Not only that, would you be able to limit yourself to only three pillars? So, for example, somebody might say, gee, three pillars. What about love? What about money? What about sincerity? What about that? Couldn't each of us come up with a list of 15 very important pillars that the world stands on, that the world counts on? Why did he narrow it down to only three? And many of the Jewish commentators give the following answer. They say that he narrowed it down to three in order to teach a lesson within a lesson. What is that lesson within the lesson? He had in mind, perhaps, say the commentaries, he had in mind perhaps a stool, a three-legged stool. And each of those legs of the three-legged stool represent one of these teachings. Now, let's say you sit on a stool and somebody comes over with a buzzsaw and they cut off a leg. Where are you going to be? Generally, the answer is on the floor, because every one of those three legs is highly important and equally important. Doesn't matter which leg the guy saws off. You're on the floor because you need the three legs in order to be able to sit on this particular stool. So the commentator suggests maybe he had in mind that if I teach that the world stands on three things, it will indicate to the people studying this text that each of those three is not only very, very important, but even deeper, they are equally important. So let's say somebody said, I'm prepared to do Torah or faith study, whatever my faith is. I'm prepared to do the texts. I'm prepared to worship God, but I'm not interested in kindness. Well, so what are the other two things doing for you? You're going to be studying holy texts and worshiping, but you don't feel a need to do kindnesses? Something's missing. There's a piece of that three-legged stool that's missing. Somebody might say, well, I can study the Torah or my faith text, and I can do kindness, but I'm not interested in worship. Okay, so you would do all that, but you have no God. You have nobody you're going to pray to, nobody you're going to call upon. Something is going to be missing in your Torah or study of your faith text and in your kindness. If you show no allegiance to a higher power, something is going to be missing in the way you practice the other two lessons. So you say, okay, I'll worship and I'll do kindness, but I'm not interested in studying the Torah. Well, the Torah teaches you how to do the worship and how to do the kindness. So to do the worship and the kindness without studying the Torah, how will you know how to do the other two? So I gave an example Wednesday night of a gentleman sitting with his father, elderly father, who has shaky hands. They're sitting in a restaurant, and they order soup for the father to eat. As you can imagine, he puts the spoon in the soup, and the closer it gets to the mouth, there's a lot less soup in the spoon. Why? Because his hands are shaky and it all falls out. But there's still a little bit left in the spoon, and that's how he's eating it. A gentleman right nearby is watching this, and he is incredulous that the son is just watching this and not helping? Why doesn't the son take the spoon and lift it and move it towards his father's mouth so he can get a full spoon of soup? Why is he just letting him spill 3/4 of it before it gets to his mouth? He has a little bit of a nerve. I wouldn't do this, but he has a bit of a nerve. And he goes over to the son, takes him aside, and he said, I really don't understand. Yeah, I've never seen anybody so mean. You see that he's struggling with this. Why don't you help him? And he said, well, I also would love to help him. I think it would be a great idea to help him get a full spoon of soup every time. But his doctor said, the more you help him, the more helpless he will think he is. So even if he's shaking and shaking and there's only a little bit of soup left in the spoon, it's his little bit left in the spoon. It's work he did. It's what he accomplished. Let him do it. Don't intervene. He needs this sense of accomplishment, even though you would accomplish more by putting the soup spoon in his mouth. So the reason I thought that was a really good example is because it's saying that when you're going to do kindness, it needs some kind of a way to do it. The doctor is telling him, this is kind. The onlooker says, this is the most unkind thing I've ever seen. But you need a professional to tell you what the kind thing is and what the unkind thing would be. And that's the professional is the Torah. The professional is the faith text of any tradition or any faith. Yep. So this is something I didn't mention, but I'll close off with this idea. Many of our commentaries say that God gave everybody, it's a Jewish text, Pirke, Avot, Ethics of the Fathers. They're talking about God gave every Jew, but I easily expand that to say to everybody that God created, which pretty much is all of us, let's say. When God created us, I believe he created everybody with the tools that they need to do all these three things. The tools to study their faith text and to appreciate it, to delve into it, to study it as simply or as deeply as they want. Everybody's got the tools to do that. I also believe that God gave everybody the tools to worship, to recognize that there's somebody above and beyond. There's something great and grander in the world than just me, the human being. I believe God gave us the tools to recognize it. Once you recognize it and what you do with it, that's your work. But I believe God gave us the tools to be able to recognize that there is a power. Our forefather Abraham, shepherd, he's out there, he sees the stars, the sky. He recognized it. It took time, but he recognized it. I think we all have the power to recognize that there's something greater in the world than just us. And I think God gives everybody the tools in the toolbox to do acts of kindness, to feel, to empathize, to sympathize, to understand people need help. People need a boost. People need a warm hand on their shoulder. Good deeds, deeds of kindness. So here's the punchline of all that. Those of you that may remember, if you don't remember the Perry Mason show, how about the Ed Sullivan show? Okay? Some of you may remember the Ed Sullivan show. Some of the younger folk here may not remember Ed Sullivan. He had a variety show. He was pretty much as stiff as a cardboard. I know styrofoam cups that had more personality than Ed Sullivan. Anyway, he introduced big acts to the world. Big names, big singers who are still alive and active today. That was the stage upon which that was the America's Got Talent, that was the stage back then, decades ago. Why do I mention this? One of the most intriguing acts that I remember him introducing on one of the shows was a guy that comes out on the stage and he's got in front of him, I guess, 2 pieces of wood. And in one piece of wood, he's got 8 rods, wooden rods, spaced evenly, rods in a hole, looks almost like a menorah or a Hanukkah menorah, and then one right near it that has maybe 7 spaces with wooden rods sticking up. So you're looking at this and you say, what the heck act is this? What, 15 rods? Woohoo. Wow, this ought to circle the world pretty quickly. And now he takes out a bunch of dishes, regular dishes, china dishes. He takes one dish and twirls it so that it goes around and spins around on the first pole. And now he takes the second dish and twirls it and spins around on the second pole. Punchline. By the end of his act, every pole has a dish that is twirling. And it's not just because he gave it that initial twirl, but he's shaking these wooden rods in a way that it keeps them going. So the crescendo of this entire act is, at the end of the act, 15 plates are twirling at the same time. You ask, what's that got to do with anything? That's what I think of when I think of Shimon the righteous, who said, the world stands on 3 things. We have the ability and the capacity to twirl these 3 things all the time, and to do it at the same time. Worship, study, acts of kindness, acts of good deeds. And so that's why the teaching is, don't just pick one of them. Don't just pick 2 of them. But every day, find time for each of these 3 pillars. Because if you're missing one, it's a leg of a stool cut off, and you're on the floor. Anyway, I think this was a fair representation of what we studied Wednesday night, August the 14th. Hope you enjoy it. Let me know. You want to comment on the WhatsApp group, you can. You want to do something more private, personal, Rabbi Adler in Israel @gmail.com. Feel free to be in touch. I hope you have a good week, and God willing, we'll see you on Wednesday, where I will have a little post-it on the screen that will remind me to record the message and to record the class. So, be well, everybody. Shalom.